Sometimes the person who saves your life is not a hero, a doctor, or a millionaire. Sometimes it is simply the stranger who decides to sit beside you when everyone else walks away. The city moved around him as if he did not exist. Thousands of footsteps crossed the downtown plaza on that chilly October afternoon. Office workers rushed toward meetings. Tourists stopped to take photographs near the fountain. Delivery drivers hurried between buildings. Everyone seemed focused on their own destination, their own schedule, their own life. Nobody noticed the man sitting alone on the far end of a wooden bench beneath a row of maple trees turning gold for the fall. Or perhaps they noticed and chose not to look. Nathan Pierce sat with his elbows resting on his knees and his eyes fixed on the pavement below. He wore an ordinary dark coat and simple jeans. Nothing about his appearance suggested success. Nothing suggested wealth. To the people passing by, he looked like any other man trying to survive a difficult day. But this was not an ordinary difficult day. For Nathan, it was the worst day he could remember. 24 hours earlier, he had stood inside a boardroom overlooking the Chicago skyline, while executives discussed growth projections and investment opportunities. 24 hours earlier, financial reporters still described him as one of the most respected entrepreneurs in the country. 24 hours earlier, he still believed he knew who he was. Now none of that seemed to matter, because grief had a way of making success feel meaningless. It stripped away titles, money, recognition. It left only silence. Nathan stared at the ground as emotions he had spent months trying to suppress finally broke through the walls he had built around them. He had spent years convincing everyone around him that he was strong, capable, unshakable, the man who always had answers, the man who always solved problems, the man who never fell apart. Yet here he was, sitting alone on a public bench while the city rushed past, realizing he no longer had the energy to pretend. A group of people walked by. None stopped. A woman talking on her phone glanced briefly in his direction before continuing on. A teenager looked over, then looked away. Life continued moving forward. Nathan almost preferred it that way. The last thing he wanted was attention. Yet deep down, another part of him wondered if anyone would notice at all. Several minutes passed. Then he heard a voice. "Excuse me." Nathan looked up. Standing a few feet away was a woman holding a paper shopping bag and a cup of coffee. She appeared to be in her early 30s. Blonde hair, kind eyes, a simple brown coat that looked more practical than fashionable. Nothing extraordinary. Yet something about her expression immediately stood out. She looked concerned. Not curious. Not judgmental. Concerned. "Are you okay?" she asked. Nathan almost laughed at the question. It seemed impossible to answer honestly. "I have been better," he admitted. Most people would have accepted that response and continued walking. This woman did not. Instead, she glanced at the empty space beside him on the bench. "Do you mind if I sit down?" The request surprised him. "You do not even know me." A small smile touched her face. That was not a no. Before Nathan could respond, she sat down. The plaza continued buzzing with activity around them. Yet somehow the space felt quieter now. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small packet of tissues. She handed it toward him. Nathan stared at it. Embarrassment immediately surfaced. He had not even realized tears remained visible in his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You are welcome." Again, silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. The kind that did not demand explanations. Eventually Nathan glanced toward her. "You do this often? Sit beside strangers?" she asked. "Only the interesting ones." Against his will, Nathan smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had managed in days. "And how do you know I am interesting?" The woman shrugged. "Because everyone else walked past." Nathan looked around the crowded plaza. Maybe they were busy. Maybe. She sipped her coffee. Or maybe people are afraid of sadness because it reminds them they cannot fix everything. The words hit harder than she realized. Nathan looked away. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she extended her hand. "I am Emily." Nathan hesitated before shaking it. "Nathan. Nice to meet you, Nathan." Strange. The simple introduction felt more genuine than half the conversations he had experienced all year. They talked for only 15 minutes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing life-changing on the surface. Emily never demanded details. She never asked what was wrong. She never pressured him to explain his pain. Instead, she spoke about ordinary things. Her small bookstore a few blocks away. The elderly customer who came in every Tuesday. The joy of finding a favorite novel on a rainy afternoon. Tiny pieces of life that somehow felt refreshing after months surrounded by business deals and corporate pressure. Eventually, Emily stood. I should get back to work. Nathan nodded. Unexpected disappointment appeared inside him. Thank you, he said. Emily smiled warmly. For what? Nathan looked at the tissue packet still resting in his hand. A simple item printed with the logo of her bookstore. For stopping. Emily's expression softened. Sometimes people need someone to stop. Then she walked away into the crowd. Nathan remained on the bench watching her disappear between hundreds of strangers. For the first time in months, the weight on his chest felt slightly lighter. Not gone, just lighter. And although neither of them realized it yet, those 15 minutes would become the beginning of a story neither could have imagined. The next morning, Nathan woke earlier than usual. For several moments, he lay staring at the ceiling of his downtown apartment while pale sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. Normally, his mornings began with emails, conference calls, and an endless list of responsibilities waiting for his attention. Today, none of those things seemed important. His eyes drifted toward the small packet of tissues resting on the kitchen counter. The logo printed on the front belonged to a bookstore called Brooks & Pages. He had noticed it several times the day before, but only now found himself studying it carefully. The packet should have been meaningless. A simple act of kindness from a stranger he would probably never see again. Yet somehow it was the first thing he looked at when he woke up. Nathan walked to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee. The silence inside the apartment felt different than usual. Less oppressive, less heavy. Not because his problems had disappeared. They had not. The grief, exhaustion, and disappointment remained exactly where they had been before. But something had changed. For 15 minutes, someone had treated him like a human being rather than a headline, a businessman, or a problem to solve. That feeling lingered. Later that morning, Nathan attended a meeting he barely remembered. Executives discussed quarterly projections. Lawyers reviewed pending agreements. Investors requested updates. The conversation flowed around him while his thoughts remained somewhere else entirely. Several times he caught himself staring out the conference room window. Nathan, one executive finally asked. Sorry, Nathan replied. Could you repeat that? The room fell briefly silent. The people around the table exchanged surprised looks. Nathan Pierce was famous for paying attention to every detail. He never asked people to repeat themselves. The realization annoyed him. By noon, he ended the meeting early and left the building. Instead of returning home, he found himself walking toward the downtown plaza. The same plaza, the same bench, the same place where everything had unexpectedly shifted the day before. The city remained busy. People hurried between office towers. Street musicians performed near the fountain. Food vendors greeted passing customers. Nathan reached the bench and sat down. For several minutes, he felt ridiculous. He had no reason to be there. No appointment. No plan. Yet he stayed. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Emily never appeared. Nathan laughed quietly at himself and stood. Of course she did not. She had her own life. Her own responsibilities. She was probably working inside her bookstore. As he turned to leave, his eyes landed on a sign 2 blocks away. Brooks & Pages. The bookstore logo matched the one printed on the tissue packet. Nathan stared at it for a moment before making a decision he could not entirely explain. A few minutes later, he stepped inside. The store smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Wooden shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Soft music played in the background. Customers wandered quietly between aisles. The atmosphere felt warm and welcoming in a way that immediately relaxed him. For the first time in months, Nathan entered a building where nobody knew who he was. Nobody approached him with questions about investments. Nobody asked about business decisions. He was simply another customer. A woman near the register looked up and smiled politely. Can I help you find anything? Nathan glanced around. Actually, I am not sure. The employee laughed. That is usually how the best bookstore visits begin. Nathan smiled. Then he noticed movement near the back of the store. Emily emerged carrying a stack of books almost taller than her arms. She looked exactly the same as she had the day before. Simple brown sweater. Blonde hair pulled back loosely. Kind eyes. She walked several steps before noticing him. Surprise immediately appeared on her face. Nathan. He felt unexpectedly relieved that she remembered his name. Hi. Emily adjusted the books in her arms. Well, this is a surprise. I was nearby. The excuse sounded weak even to him. Her smile widened slightly. Sure you were. Nathan laughed. For the first time in weeks, the sound came easily. Emily placed the books on a nearby table. So how are you doing today? The question was simple. Ordinary. Yet nobody else had asked it that morning without expecting something in return. Nathan considered giving his usual automatic answer. Instead, he chose honesty. A little better. Emily seemed genuinely pleased by that response. Good. For the next 20 minutes, they talked between customers and shelving tasks. Nothing dramatic. Nothing deeply personal. Emily recommended novels. Nathan admitted he had not read for pleasure in years. She looked horrified by that confession. He found himself laughing again. By the time he finally left the bookstore, the city looked exactly the same as it always had. Traffic filled the streets. Buildings towered overhead. People hurried toward their next destination. Yet Nathan felt different walking through it. Lighter somehow. As though a small piece of the person he used to be had quietly started finding its way back. And for the first time since his life began unraveling, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow. The bookstore became part of Nathan's routine before he fully realized it was happening. What began as a single unexpected visit turned into several. Then several became many. Some days he stopped by to browse shelves he had no intention of purchasing from. Other days he arrived carrying a cup of coffee and stayed only long enough for a brief conversation with Emily before returning to the rest of his day. For the first time in months, he found himself looking forward to something that had nothing to do with business. That realization alone felt remarkable. 3 weeks after their first meeting, autumn had settled comfortably over Chicago. Golden leaves drifted through the streets. The air carried a pleasant chill that encouraged long walks and warm coffee. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, Nathan entered Brooks and Page's to find Emily standing on a ladder attempting to reach a book on a high shelf. This looks dangerous, he said. Emily glanced down. I am a bookstore owner. Danger is part of the profession. Nathan laughed. You are 6 inches away from proving that statement literally. Emily rolled her eyes. Then perhaps you should help. A few seconds later, Nathan retrieved the book with ease. Emily accepted it dramatically. Thank you for saving both me and the mystery section. Happy to be of service. Moments like this had become common. Simple. Ordinary. Yet strangely meaningful. Neither of them discussed it directly, but their friendship was growing. Emily noticed it too. Nathan smiled more often now. The sadness she had first seen on the bench had not disappeared completely, but it no longer dominated every expression. There were still moments when he seemed distant. Moments when his thoughts drifted somewhere she could not follow. Yet those moments grew less frequent. One rainy afternoon, they sat at a small table near the back of the bookstore while customers wandered quietly through the aisles. Emily sorted inventory lists while Nathan flipped through a novel she had insisted he read. You are on chapter 3, she observed. I am. Do you like it? Nathan considered the question. The main character makes terrible decisions. Emily nodded. That is called realism. He laughed. Fair point. Their conversation continued effortlessly. Books led to movies. Movies led to travel. Travel led to childhood memories. Nathan found himself sharing stories he had not thought about in years. Summer fishing trips with his father. High school basketball games. The tiny apartment where he lived while building his first company. Emily listened carefully to every story. Not because of who he was. Simply because she cared. Nathan found that difference impossible to ignore. Most people listened to him because of his success. Emily listened because she was interested in the person speaking. One evening after closing time, Emily locked the bookstore door while Nathan helped organize several boxes of new arrivals. Rain tapped softly against the front windows. The city outside seemed distant. Can I ask you something? Emily said. Nathan looked up. Sure. Why do you never talk about work? The question caught him off guard. Emily quickly raised her hands. You do not have to answer. Nathan smiled. No, it is a fair question. He thought for a moment. Because for a long time work became my entire identity. Emily sat on the edge of a nearby table. That sounds exhausting. It was. Nathan closed one of the boxes. When people only know one version of you, eventually you start forgetting who you are without it. Emily considered his words carefully. And who are you without it? Nathan opened his mouth, then paused. Surprisingly, he did not know the answer. Emily smiled gently. See? That is a much more interesting question. Nathan stared at her for several seconds before laughing. You have a habit of making things complicated. No, Emily said. I have a habit of making people think. The answer stayed with him long after he left the bookstore that night. In the weeks that followed, something else began changing. Nathan started sleeping better. The nightmares that once woke him before sunrise appeared less often. He found himself taking walks through the city without feeling overwhelmed. He even resumed hobbies he had abandoned years earlier. Small changes, but meaningful ones. Emily noticed every single one. One Saturday afternoon, she watched him laughing with an elderly customer who needed help reaching a book. The sight made her smile. The man sitting across from her now looked nothing like the broken stranger she had met weeks earlier. Yet she still sensed hidden chapters beneath the surface. Nathan remained careful whenever conversations approached certain subjects. Family, career, personal history. He never lied, but he often redirected. Most people would have pressed for answers. Emily did not. Everyone carried wounds they revealed in their own time. As closing time approached, Nathan prepared to leave. He paused beside the front door. Thank you, he said unexpectedly. Emily looked up from the register. For what? Nathan glanced around the bookstore. The shelves, the warm lights, the peaceful atmosphere that had become a refuge. Then he looked at her. For giving me a reason to look forward to tomorrow. Emily felt her heart skip slightly. Neither said anything more. Nathan smiled and stepped outside into the cool autumn evening. Watching him disappear into the crowd, Emily realized something important. She no longer looked forward to his visits because she felt sorry for him. She looked forward to them because somewhere along the way, the stranger from the bench had become one of the most important parts of her day. As November approached, the friendship between Emily and Nathan settled into something neither of them had expected. It was no longer unusual for Nathan to stop by the bookstore almost every day. Some visits lasted 10 minutes. Others stretched into entire afternoons. Customers had even started noticing. One elderly woman who visited every Wednesday glanced between them with a knowing smile and whispered to Emily, "That young man seems very fond of bookstores." Emily laughed. "I think he is fond of coffee." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Sure he is." Nathan, standing nearby, pretended not to hear. The truth was that the bookstore had become one of the few places where he felt completely at peace. There were no expectations inside those walls. No investors demanding answers. No executives waiting for decisions. No headlines. Just books, quiet conversations, and a woman who somehow made ordinary moments feel important. One afternoon, Emily discovered him reorganizing a display table near the entrance. "You know," she said, "employees usually receive training before changing my store layout." Nathan stepped back and studied his work. "I think it looks better." Emily crossed her arms dramatically. "And if I disagree? Then we blame the customer who gave me the idea." Emily laughed. "You are becoming suspiciously comfortable here." Nathan smiled. "Maybe." The answer lingered between them longer than either expected. Later that day, a sudden rainstorm rolled across the city. Customers hurried inside seeking shelter while thunder echoed beyond the windows. Emily and Nathan found themselves alone near closing time. The bookstore felt unusually quiet. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Warm light reflected across shelves filled with novels and biographies. Emily finished counting receipts while Nathan sat nearby reading. After several minutes, she noticed he had stopped turning pages. Instead, he stared thoughtfully at the same paragraph. "What is going on in that head of yours?" she asked. Nathan looked up. "Do you ever wonder how different life might be if one small thing had happened differently?" Emily considered the question. "Sometimes. I have been thinking about that day in the plaza." Emily smiled. "The day you scared half the city by looking incredibly miserable." Nathan laughed. "That one. What about it?" He closed the book. "I keep wondering what would have happened if you had kept walking." The question caught her off guard. Emily leaned back in her chair. "Probably nothing." Nathan shook his head slowly. "I do not think that is true." His voice carried a sincerity that immediately silenced her playful response. "Why?" she asked quietly. Nathan looked toward the rain-covered window. "Because I was not doing very well back then." Emily already knew that much. "I noticed." "No," Nathan said softly. "I mean really not well." The room grew still. Emily sensed there was more behind those words than he usually allowed himself to reveal. Nathan took a slow breath. "For months I convinced myself that if I kept moving forward, eventually everything would feel normal again. He smiled sadly. Instead, I just became exhausted. Emily listened carefully. And then a stranger sat down beside me and acted like my pain was not something to avoid. His eyes met hers. Do you know how rare that is? Emily looked away, suddenly feeling emotional. I was just being nice. Exactly. Nathan's answer came immediately. You think it was something small because kindness comes naturally to you. The honesty in his voice made her heart beat faster. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, rain continued falling steadily across the city. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Well, for the record, I am glad I stopped too. Nathan smiled. A real smile. Warm. Grateful. The kind that reached his eyes now far more often than it once had. As the evening continued, they talked about everything and nothing. Favorite childhood memories. Embarrassing first jobs. Books they loved. Dreams they once had before life became complicated. Hours passed without either noticing. Eventually, Emily glanced at the clock and gasped. We closed 40 minutes ago. Nathan looked around the empty bookstore and laughed. I guess we did. Together, they finished locking up. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city streets glistened beneath rows of streetlights. For a moment, they stood together beneath the awning near the entrance. Neither seemed eager to leave. Same time tomorrow? Emily asked casually. Nathan smiled. You assume I have plans. Do you? He shook his head. Not anymore. As he walked away, Emily watched him disappear into the evening crowd. A strange realization settled over her. Somewhere between the bench, the bookstore, and countless conversations, Nathan had become more than a customer. More than a friend she happened to enjoy spending time with. And judging by the way he looked at her lately, she suspected the same thing might be happening to him. Neither was ready to say it aloud. But both could feel it growing quietly between them, stronger with every passing day. December arrived with early snow and shorter days. Chicago transformed into a city of glowing lights, holiday decorations, and crowded sidewalks filled with people carrying shopping bags and warm drinks. Inside Brooks and Page's, business was better than usual. Customers searched for gifts. Families wandered between shelves. Children sat near the reading corner, listening to seasonal stories. Emily loved this time of year. The bookstore felt alive. Nathan found himself spending even more time there. Sometimes he helped carry inventory. Other times he stood behind the counter while Emily assisted customers. Neither officially acknowledged how naturally he fit into her daily life now. One snowy afternoon, Emily was organizing a display near the front window when a black luxury sedan stopped outside the bookstore. She barely noticed it at first. Expensive cars occasionally appeared downtown. What caught her attention was the reaction from Nathan. He had been laughing at something she said only moments earlier. The second he noticed the vehicle, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for her to see it. The warmth disappeared. Tension replaced it. Before Emily could ask what was wrong, the bookstore door opened. A sharply dressed man stepped inside. He looked to be in his 50s and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. The moment he saw Nathan, he stopped walking. There you are, the man said. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. Hello, Richard. Emily glanced between them. Something about the interaction immediately felt unusual. Richard looked relieved and frustrated at the same time. Do you have any idea how many people have been trying to reach you? Nathan folded his arms. A few. Richard laughed without humor. Nathan, entire departments are rearranging schedules because nobody knows what you are doing. Emily frowned. Entire departments? Nathan stepped toward the man. This is not the place. Richard finally seemed to notice her standing nearby. I apologize. He extended his hand politely. Richard Collins. Emily shook it. Emily Brooks. Richard's expression softened slightly. So you are Emily. Nathan immediately looked uncomfortable. Emily noticed. Richard noticed too. You talk about her more than you realize, Richard added. Nathan sighed. Richard. The warning in his voice was obvious. Richard smiled. Right. I will stop talking. Yet the damage was already done. Emily's curiosity immediately intensified. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. Richard handed Nathan a folder. They spoke quietly near the entrance. Then the older man left as suddenly as he had arrived. Once the door closed, silence filled the bookstore. Emily looked toward Nathan. Entire departments? She asked. Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. It sounds more dramatic than it is. Emily raised an eyebrow. that answer usually means the opposite. Nathan laughed softly, but offered nothing more. The rest of the afternoon passed normally, at least on the surface. Yet Emily found herself noticing details she had previously ignored. Nathan occasionally received phone calls he never answered in front of her. His clothing was simple, but the quality was unmistakably expensive. He seemed comfortable discussing topics most people rarely understood: real estate markets, corporate strategy, economic trends. Individually, none of it meant much. Together, the pieces began forming a picture she could not quite complete. A week later, another clue appeared. Emily was carrying a stack of books through the bookstore when she accidentally dropped one. It landed near Nathan's coat. As she bent to retrieve it, something slipped from an inside pocket. A laminated event badge. Emily picked it up automatically. The moment she saw the name, her eyes widened. Chicago Leadership Summit. Keynote speaker, Nathan Pierce. She stared at the badge. The photograph clearly showed him wearing a tailored suit in front of a conference backdrop. Before she could study it further, Nathan stepped forward and gently took it from her hand. For a brief second, neither spoke. "You are a keynote speaker?" Emily finally asked. Nathan hesitated. "Sometimes." "For what?" Another pause. "Business conferences." Emily laughed softly. "Nathan, every answer you give somehow creates 3 new questions." His expression became thoughtful, almost sad. "I know." Emily looked directly at him. "You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share." The sincerity in her voice seemed to affect him. "Thank you. But I am starting to think you are hiding something." Nathan smiled faintly. "You might be right." The answer should have frustrated her. Instead, it deepened the mystery. Later that night, after closing the bookstore, Emily sat alone reviewing invoices. Her thoughts kept returning to Nathan. Not because of the badge, not because of the expensive car or the strange conversations. Because despite all the unanswered questions, she trusted him. She trusted the kindness he showed people. She trusted the vulnerability she had seen on that bench. She trusted the man who spent afternoons recommending books to customers and helping carry boxes through the store. Yet somewhere beyond the version of Nathan she knew existed another world. A world filled with executives, leadership summits, and people who searched entire cities when they could not find him. Emily did not know exactly who Nathan Pierce was, but for the first time, she became certain of one thing. The stranger she met on that bench was far more important than he had ever allowed her to believe. The reveal happened on a cold December evening when Emily least expected it. The bookstore had partnered with several local organizations for a holiday literacy fundraiser being held at one of the largest convention centers in downtown Chicago. Hundreds of guests attended. Community leaders, business owners, educators, and sponsors filled the enormous ballroom decorated with lights, evergreen garlands, and elegant holiday displays. Emily almost declined the invitation. The bookstore was busy, and large events were never her favorite thing. But one of the organizers insisted she come because Brooks and Pages had become an important part of the program. By the time Emily arrived, the ballroom was already crowded. She spent the first hour speaking with guests, discussing books, literacy programs, and community projects. Everything felt normal until the lights suddenly dimmed and the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. Conversations faded. Attention shifted toward the enormous screens positioned throughout the room. "Tonight," the host announced, "we are honored to welcome one of the most influential business leaders in America. A man whose company has invested billions into communities across the country. A visionary entrepreneur whose work has transformed industries." Emily smiled politely and reached for her glass of water. Then a photograph appeared on the giant screen behind the stage. Her hand froze. The room erupted into applause. Emily stared in disbelief. There, filling screens 20 feet tall, was Nathan. Not the Nathan who spent afternoons organizing bookshelves. Not the Nathan who sat on a bench feeling lost. This version wore a tailored suit and stood in front of skyscrapers while headlines and magazine covers flashed behind him. The image changed again, then again. Corporate awards, television interviews, major business publications, conference stages packed with thousands of people. "Please welcome Mr. Nathan Pierce." The applause grew even louder. Emily felt her heart stop. Nathan stepped onto the stage. The same man, the same eyes, the same smile. Yet suddenly he seemed to belong to a completely different world. Every mystery instantly made sense. The luxury sedan, the executives searching for him, the keynote speaker badge, the unanswered questions. Nathan Pierce was not simply successful. He was one of the most recognized entrepreneurs in the country, a millionaire whose name appeared regularly in financial media and national business headlines. Emily barely heard the beginning of his speech. Her thoughts raced too quickly. Around her, guests whispered excitedly. Some spoke about investments. Others discussed major developments and corporate achievements. Everyone seemed to know exactly who Nathan Pierce was. Everyone except her. Nathan began speaking about community programs and educational opportunities. His voice remained calm and confident. Yet several times his eyes scanned the audience. Then he saw her. For a brief second, his expression changed. Emily recognized it immediately. Worry. The same worry she had seen whenever conversations came too close to his hidden life. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Neither looked away. Emily suddenly understood why he had never wanted her to discover the truth this way. After the presentation ended, dozens of people surrounded Nathan. Executives, reporters, sponsors, community leaders. Everyone wanted a moment of his attention. Emily quietly moved toward the exit. She needed air. She needed time to think. She almost reached the doors when she heard someone call her name. Emily. She stopped. Nathan approached quickly, ignoring several people attempting to speak with him. The crowd seemed confused as he walked directly past them. Emily, please. She turned slowly. You are Nathan Pierce. It was not a question. Nathan nodded. Yes. The simple answer somehow hurt more than she expected. You are a millionaire. Again he nodded. Yes. Emily laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because she suddenly remembered every conversation where he carefully avoided telling the whole truth. You never thought that was important information? Nathan took a step closer. I wanted you to know me before you knew that. Emily looked around the ballroom. Screens still displayed photographs from his career. People continued staring in their direction. I think you succeeded. Nathan's expression tightened. Emily. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Who have I actually been getting to know? Silence filled the space between them. The applause had faded. The music had returned. Yet neither seemed aware of anything happening around them. Nathan finally answered in a voice barely above a whisper. The same man who sat on that bench. Emily wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. But standing in that ballroom surrounded by evidence of everything he had hidden, believing suddenly felt much harder than before. Emily left the convention center without looking back. Snow drifted gently through the city as she walked several blocks before realizing she had no destination in mind. The cold air stung her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts remained fixed on the ballroom, the giant screens, the applause, and the realization that the man she had come to trust had hidden an enormous part of his life. By the time she reached her apartment, exhaustion had replaced shock. She sat beside the window overlooking the street below and replayed every conversation they had ever shared. The bench, the bookstore, the long evenings talking about life, the quiet moments that had felt so genuine. None of those memories seemed false. That was what made everything so complicated. Nathan had never pretended to be someone else. Yet he had never told her who he truly was either. The next morning, Brooks and Pages opened as usual. Customers arrived. Deliveries needed attention. Shelves needed organizing. Emily focused on work because work was easier than thinking. Around noon, the bell above the bookstore door chimed. Her heart immediately reacted before her mind could stop it. Nathan stood in the entrance. Snow rested lightly on his coat. His expression carried the same mixture of hope and concern she remembered from the night before. For a moment, neither moved. Then Emily quietly turned back toward the books she was arranging. Nathan approached slowly. Can we talk? Emily kept her attention on the shelf. I am working. Emily. The way he said her name made it difficult to remain distant. Still, she continued organizing books. You should probably be at another conference. Nathan exhaled softly. I deserve that. The honesty caught her off guard. Finally, she looked at him. Do you? He nodded. Probably more than that. Several customers wandered nearby, forcing both of them to keep their voices low. Nathan glanced around the bookstore. Please. 5 minutes. Emily hesitated before pointing toward the small reading area near the back. They sat across from each other at a wooden table. For several seconds, neither spoke. Nathan broke the silence first. I never wanted you to find out that way. Emily folded her arms. Then how did you want me to find out? Nathan looked down briefly. From me. When? She asked. After another month? Another year? Nathan did not answer immediately. The hesitation itself was answer enough. Emily felt disappointment tighten inside her chest. That is the problem, she said quietly. I do not know where the line is anymore. Nathan looked directly at her. The line. Between what was real and what was hidden. Pain crossed his face. Genuine pain. Emily. Everything that mattered was real. She wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. Yet trust, once broken, rarely returned immediately. Nathan leaned forward slightly. The conversations were real. The friendship was real. What I felt was real. Emily's heart reacted to those words despite herself. She quickly looked away. You keep saying that. Because it is true. Silence followed. Customers moved quietly between shelves. Soft music played overhead. The familiar comfort of the bookstore suddenly felt fragile. Nathan spoke again. The reason I never told you had nothing to do with being ashamed of who I am. Emily listened without responding. It was because I was afraid of losing the one place where nobody expected anything from me. His voice softened. When I walked into this bookstore, I was not a company. I was not a headline. I was not a millionaire. He paused. I was just Nathan. The sincerity in his words made her chest ache. Emily remembered the broken man from the bench. The man who struggled to smile. The man who gradually found pieces of himself again through simple conversations and ordinary kindness. That man had been real. She knew it. Then why does it hurt so much? She asked quietly. Nathan's expression fell. Because I should have trusted you sooner. The answer came without hesitation. No excuses. No justification. Just honesty. For the first time since the reveal, Emily saw something beyond the successful businessman and public figure. She saw the same vulnerable man who had once sat alone in a crowded plaza. Yet the wound remained. Trust needed time. Healing needed time. Eventually, Emily stood. Nathan immediately rose as well. I am not saying goodbye, she told him softly. Hope flickered across his face. You are not. Emily shook her head. I am saying I need space to understand all of this. Nathan nodded slowly. The answer clearly hurt, but he respected it. Take all the time you need. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she offered a small smile. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something closer than the distance that existed the night before. Nathan noticed it too. As he walked toward the door, he paused beside the entrance. For what it is worth, he said quietly, meeting you was the best thing that happened to me this year. Emily watched him disappear into the snowy afternoon. For the first time since learning the truth, she allowed herself to admit something she had been avoiding. The reason this hurt so much was not because Nathan was a millionaire. It was because somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with him. The weeks that followed became a turning point in Nathan's life. For the first time in years, he stopped asking what would make his company stronger and started asking what would make his life more meaningful. The difference seemed small on paper. In reality, it changed everything. January arrived with heavy snow and freezing winds sweeping across Chicago. Inside corporate headquarters, executives gathered for annual planning meetings expecting the same ambitious expansion strategies Nathan had championed for years. Instead, they witnessed something entirely different. Nathan stood at the head of the conference table and calmly announced major changes. Several aggressive development projects would be canceled. New resources would be redirected toward community partnerships, education initiatives, and local investment programs. The room fell silent. Some executives looked confused. Others looked shocked. One board member finally spoke. These projects are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Nathan nodded. I know. Then why walk away from them? Nathan glanced out the window, overlooking the city skyline. Because growth means nothing if you forget why you started building in the first place. The answer quickly became the subject of endless discussion. Financial journalists analyzed it. Investors questioned it. Industry experts debated it. Yet Nathan remained firm. For the first time, he was making decisions based on values rather than expectations. Meanwhile, Emily focused on the bookstore. Winter business remained strong. Customers filled the shops seeking warmth, stories, and conversation during the coldest months of the year. Life continued moving forward. Yet despite the distance, Nathan never completely disappeared. Every few weeks a handwritten letter arrived. Never extravagant. Never dramatic. He wrote about books he had recently finished. Funny encounters during business trips. Reflections about life. small details that felt surprisingly personal. Emily read every letter more than once. One snowy evening, she sat alone behind the register after closing time and unfolded the newest envelope. The final paragraph caught her attention immediately. You once asked who I was without work. I think I finally have an answer. I am still figuring it out. But for the first time, I am excited to find out. Emily smiled softly. The sentence stayed with her long after she placed the letter away. Months passed. Spring slowly replaced winter. The city thawed. Trees began blooming. Outdoor cafes reopened. One afternoon, Emily found herself walking through the downtown plaza where everything had started. The same fountain remained at the center. The same pathways crossed between office buildings. The same wooden bench sat beneath newly green trees. She stopped for a moment and smiled. It felt strange remembering the broken stranger she had met there. A man she almost walked past. A man who had somehow become one of the most important people in her life. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared from Nathan. Are you busy? Emily laughed softly. Depends who is asking. The response arrived immediately. A man trying to be brave. Her heart skipped. She stared at the screen for several seconds before replying. That sounds serious. Another message appeared. Meet me at the bookstore after closing. The rest of the day passed painfully slowly. By evening, curiosity and anticipation had completely replaced concentration. When the final customer left and the doors were locked, Emily turned around to find Nathan standing near the center of the store. He looked different again, not because of money or success, because he seemed genuinely at peace. The heaviness she once saw in his eyes had faded almost completely. Hi, he said. Emily smiled. Hi. For several moments, they simply stood there. Then Nathan looked around the bookstore. You know, this place changed my life. Emily laughed softly. That seems dramatic. It is true. His expression grew serious. Actually, one person in particular changed my life. Emily felt her heart begin racing. Nathan stepped closer. I spent years believing success could solve everything. His voice remained calm. Then I met someone who showed me that being understood matters more. Emily could not look away. Nathan, he smiled gently. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. The statement surprised her. You are not. Nathan shook his head. No. He reached into his pocket and removed the small tissue packet she had handed him months earlier in the plaza. The edges were worn now, but he had clearly kept it. I just wanted you to know something. Emily stared at it. The simple object instantly brought back every memory. The bench. The conversation. The beginning. Nathan's voice softened. You helped save me on the day I had almost given up on myself. Silence filled the bookstore. Warm. Honest. Real. And for the first time since the truth had been revealed, Emily realized that the man standing in front of her was no longer running from his life. He had finally become the person he was meant to be. 1 year later, the city looked different. Or perhaps Emily had changed enough to see it differently. Spring sunlight reflected from glass towers. Sidewalk cafes overflowed with conversation. The downtown plaza buzzed with life beneath rows of green trees swaying gently in the breeze. Yet one thing remained exactly the same. The wooden bench still stood near the fountain where everything had begun. Emily smiled as she approached it that Saturday afternoon. Nathan's message from the previous evening had been simple. Meet me at the bench tomorrow at 3. No explanation. No clues. Just a request. Somehow she already knew it mattered. As she walked through the plaza, memories returned one after another. The broken stranger sitting alone. The packet of tissues. The 15-minute conversation. The unexpected friendship. The hidden truth. The heartbreak. The healing. Every step felt like walking through the chapters of a story neither of them could have predicted. When Emily reached the bench, she stopped. Nathan was already there. He stood beneath the trees wearing a simple navy jacket, looking both nervous and hopeful at the same time. The sight immediately made her smile. For all his success, all his confidence in business, he still looked slightly uncertain whenever something truly mattered to him. You are early, she said. Nathan laughed softly. I have been here for 20 minutes. That sounds like anxiety. That sounds accurate. Emily joined him beside the bench. For a moment, they simply stood together watching people move through the plaza. Children laughed near the fountain. Street musicians performed nearby. Life continued around them exactly as it had on the day they met. Nathan finally reached into his pocket. Emily immediately recognized the object. The small packet of tissues. Slightly worn now, carefully preserved. She laughed. You actually kept it all this time. Of course I did. Most people would have thrown it away. Nathan looked at her. Most people would have walked past that bench. The answer left her speechless. Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Nathan took a slow breath. There is something I need to tell you. Emily felt her heart begin to race. Okay. Nathan looked toward the fountain before returning his gaze to hers. A year ago I thought my life was ending. His voice remained steady. I had money, success, recognition, everything people spend their lives chasing. He smiled sadly. And none of it could help me climb out of the place I was trapped in. Emily listened quietly. Nathan continued. Then you sat beside me. His eyes never left hers. You did not know who I was. You did not know what I owned. You did not know what I could offer. His voice softened. You just saw another human being having a difficult day. Emotion filled Emily's chest. Nathan stepped closer. You reminded me that kindness still exists. You reminded me that life is bigger than work, bigger than achievements, bigger than fear. He smiled. You helped me become someone I actually like being. Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. Nathan, he shook his head gently. Let me finish. She laughed through the emotion and nodded. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket one final time. This time he removed a small velvet box. Emily immediately stopped breathing. The plaza seemed to disappear. The noise, the crowd, the city itself faded into the background. There was only Nathan. Only this moment. He opened the box. Inside rested a beautiful ring, elegant and simple, perfectly suited to the woman standing before him. I spent a long time building companies, Nathan said quietly. But the most important thing I ever found was sitting on this bench. Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks. Nathan smiled. Emily Brooks, will you marry me? For one heartbeat, she could not speak. Every memory flashed through her mind. The bookstore, the letters, the difficult conversations, the trust they rebuilt together, the man who had learned how to heal, the woman who had learned how deeply she loved him. Finally, she laughed through her tears and nodded. Yes. Nathan's eyes closed briefly in relief before he slipped the ring onto her finger. The crowd around them continued moving, unaware of the life-changing moment taking place beside the fountain. Then Emily wrapped her arms around him, and Nathan held her tightly beneath the spring sunlight. Applause suddenly erupted nearby. A few strangers who had witnessed the proposal cheered. Emily laughed. Nathan laughed. For the first time, neither cared who was watching. A year earlier they had met as strangers, one carrying pain, the other carrying kindness. Now they stood together at the exact place where their story began, ready to begin a new chapter. And as the afternoon sunlight illuminated the plaza, Nathan realized something remarkable. The darkest moment of his life had led him directly to the brightest future he could have imagined.